Endgame's converged endpoint security platform is transforming security programs, their people, processes, and technology with the most powerful endpoint protection and simplest user experience, ensuring analysts of any skill level can stop targeted attacks before information theft. Endgame unifies prevention, detection, and threat hunting to stop known and unknown attacker behaviors at scale with a single agent. For more information, visit endgame.com.
The average time between being hacked and realizing you've been hacked is 1 year. Can you afford to let an intruder roam your network for that long? Can your company weather the fallout when this comes to light? Black Hills Information Security can find the bad guys in your network and train you to do it yourself. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a hunt teaming engagement can help you find a persistent threat in your network.
Welcome back, everyone. Just a quick announcement. Please join us for our webcast with Signal Sciences titled, Which Way Should You Shift in the SDLC? This will be held on November 8th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be hosted by myself, Larry Pesce, and Zane Lackey. If you can believe that, Doug, that is going to be one fun webcast. That's really, I mean, I should probably just lead in with that.
Yeah.
It's me, Zane, and Larry, because that's a cast of characters right there. securityweekly.com/Signal Sciences. Register today. And we're here with John Walsh. He is the product marketing manager for the Conjure product line. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Sweet.
It's not Conjure.
Did I screw it up already or no?
On the previous ad reading you did, but
I
no,
did. Okay,
you got
I
it.
did.
You got it now.
I was silly. It's conjure, like a wizard would conjure.
Unless you're French, it's conjure.
Conjure.
I was doing the French pronunciation.
You should try that. That's a really
It makes it sound fancier, I think.
Or like it's like perfume or something.
Yeah.
It's like Kim Kardashian prevents conjure. The smell of failure.
I like it.
Yeah.
So you should hire Doug to do your
smell of penetration.
Is he available?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
He is for a fee. Doug's available for pretty much anything.
I mean, it's just like
Not that
Outback.
stuff.
Be careful what you wish for.
Conjure.
So you made the trek down from CyberArk has an office in Boston?
In Newton, yes.
Newton, okay.
Yeah.
And so you made the trek down?
Yeah, it was a little longer than I thought, but I made it here.
Excellent. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
In studio. And talking about Conjure. Now you're messing me up because you said the other pronunciation, and Doug's doing the weird French thing. And now our audience will never forget that Conjure is a product.
That's
true. Yeah.
It is actually. Well, we'll talk about it. Well, actually, John, why don't you describe what we're talking about here when we say Conjure? What does that mean in the context of, well, it was an acquisition by CyberArk being brought into the fold. Tell our audience what this is all about.
Well, Conjure is a secrets management and authentication authorization platform. And CyberArk has been in the business of privileged access security for over a decade, right? And we've been in the application security space since before even DevOps existed, right? But Conjure, what that does is it's highly scalable, and it fits into highly elastic environments more easily, and it works better with some DevOps environments.
Why would someone want Conjure? What's the problem it's solving?
Well, it's solving the same problem that people have had for decades, right? Where you steal someone's credentials. I worked at another company. And people really didn't see the value of, say, SSH key management, which is one type of secret or credential, right? And until like Edward Snowden came along, people were like, oh, geez, I guess someone on the inside can like gain access to this, and then escalate their privileges to gain access to that until they get stuff they're not supposed to have, and they have access to everything, right? So that's one way, is the insider. And then the other way is externally, where there's been some recent breaches, mostly by nation-state actors, where they used some kind of malware or something, and then they're able to get inside the environment and then steal credentials or secrets to move throughout the environment, gain more access to everything. So they're spreading out that attack from the initial blast radius and getting access to pretty much the entire enterprise at that point.
And I think another great use case, too, is I've published source code Maybe I put that source code on the internet, and it just so happens that there's some credentials or secrets in there that anyone can just go view, right?
Yeah, no, it happens. It can happen to anyone, right? I mean, they have tools out there. One of the best known ones is Truffle Hog to look for those credentials. And why do they do that? Because people are doing what you just said. It wouldn't exist if that was the case. Right. And to take it a little step further, I once worked on this honeypot project to capture basically malicious traffic, right? So you put up a system out there, AWS system out there, and then you wait to see people attack it and how they attack it and how they get in. And they're getting in via SSH. It's via passwords, via SSH keys, right? And some of the passwords they're using were the Chinese word for change me. That was like one of the most common passwords that came up.
Doug, what is that? You're fluent in Chinese,
I don't
right?
know what I don't know what it is. What is
I'll
it?
get back to you. I forget.
I'll look it up.
I knew that was coming.
I'll look it up.
I don't want to say it because I'm afraid I'm going to mess it up. But
apparently Doug's knowledge of Chinese is to very specific phrases, and I'm not going to have him go into that because God, I don't want to know.
There's things you got to ask for, man.
I know, and I don't want to know what those are when you go to China, Doug. I really don't.
He's going to give you the wrong word, and you're going to use it. And
yes, exactly.
But the point is, they wouldn't be doing that if people weren't doing these stupid things, right? So putting their credentials, their passwords, their secrets in their source code. I think we all know about Uber, right? We all know that they've done that not once but twice. Oof. And they're not the only ones. There was another Chinese-based drone company where they had a similar situation where someone was able to find secrets out there in a public repository, and they weren't supposed to.
Yeah, I'll say that was DJI.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, we actually interviewed Kevin Finisterre about some of those. Yeah,
awesome. Yeah,
Kevin's the man. Also, John Stratton was telling me that he was telling me in Enterprise Security Weekly when I had mentioned Conjure. He's like, yeah, we've seen that. He's like, actually, I got a funny story. He's like, we found this service, right? He's like, we were scanning the network and we found this service, and every time you connect to this high number port, it would just spit back like 64 characters of what looked like random data. And he's like, we thought it was really weird. And it's like, after we like dug into it, he's like, it turns out that was a password. And they put it in a high port because they're like, oh, no one would see it there. And so their applications could connect to this port, grab a password, and then that password was used to authenticate to other things. And I was like, oh. And for our listeners, if you visit conjure.org/Security Weekly, you can get all the good stuff that we're going to talk about. Yeah. And you have an open source. So like if you're confronted with this problem, if you're a security professional and you're writing code and you have projects, which many of us do, right? Or you're interfacing with development teams and you either don't know or maybe you have an idea of how they're managing and authenticating, managing their secrets and authenticating. Right. If you don't know, it could be really bad because it could go back to John's example where there's just a high port that's spitting out a password, which is obviously really bad. Again, you go to conjure.org/Security Weekly, and now you can get this. A lot of this open source. I mean, describe what you get, what's open source, and then what the differences are when you go to the commercial side.
It's all out there, open source. And a little bit about my background. I used to be a developer, so I kind of know how they think. And with DevOps, they are the people that are going and grabbing those tools, unbeknownst to security sometimes.
Sure,
we can get into that later. But so it may make it easier for developers to go out there and grab it, or even for security to go out there and grab it and see how it works and go through the tutorials and figure out, do it themselves, so then go back to security, back to the developers and say, hey, look, I tried this, I know how it works, and they can sound like they know what they're talking about to have some credibility. And what do you get for open source? You get basically everything. They're now in the same version, v5. The only thing you don't get is something that you would probably have more for like enterprise, is high availability, the GUI interface, and that's basically it.
Gotcha. So functional wise, pretty much they're on. Pretty much. Sounds like they're on par.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. And essentially what we're talking about is secrets management or a vault, right? Mm-hmm. And so can you describe like at a high level how all that works?
Yeah, and that's just one part of it. It's secrets management and also authentication and authorization as well. And you're able to set your security policy. And I think a lot of times when people think of secrets, they don't put them in the context of what that represents. And that represents access. So by controlling those secrets, you're controlling access. If I have your secret, I can gain access to what you can gain access to with that, right? So that's how you control it through
like
secrets.
in an API example, right?
API,
like
yeah.
my Twitter client ID and
Right.
his client secret is my secret to gain access to things. It's not quite the same level of access as I would get with the person's username and password, but it affords me access to that service on with that user's credentials, essentially.
Right. Yeah. No, it depends. It depends. In that case, it might not be the same access. In some cases, it could be more privileged access, and it could be more dangerous that they gain that
Right.
access.
In Twitter's case, it's less privileged access.
Yeah.
In some cases, you're right. It could be more.
Right.
Because you have applications talking to other services or applications. Is that the most common use case for a vault in this capacity? Is it really a developer tool that I have an application that has to authenticate to something else?
It would be any sort of secret you can think of, right? So passwords, SSH keys, certificates, anywhere you use a secret. So you're writing code, and you have an API. You want to gain access. You want to gain access to a service. And then you have to use a secret to gain that access so that it can verify that you are that person you say you are. So what we do is we replace all of those secrets and we take them out of the source code.
Yeah, why can't I just keep them in my source code? I mean,
well, like you said before, you check that into where? You check that into GitHub, right? Then what happens? All right. So like maybe your GitHub is public. Some people have like a private GitHub. But sometimes that's exposed accidentally. We've seen that, time and time again. And then in addition, sometimes there's other people in the company who they have access to that repo, and they can look at it, and maybe they shouldn't be able to view that secret.
Or they reuse the code. I mean, you see people pull
Copy
code
and
and they
paste,
say, oh, yeah, this is all over here. I just grabbed this out. That's a primeval DevOps problem, too, because, used to people wrote a lot of SQL queries and things into their code.
Right.
And they had to put a password to log into SQL to the database. And it was in plain text. It was right there in quotes. And you could search for it. And a lot of times people had, like, code plans even just on paper. They would have all their source code on paper in file folders just sitting, in the company, and they're all organized, and they've got the names on the spines, and you could just pull it down and look and go right there. And they use the same password over and over and over and over and over and over again. So even this compile code, so it's just a primeval DevOps problem to strip those things out.
Yeah, I mean that's the DevOps equivalent of writing your password on a little sticky and then putting it on your computer screen.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Except it's digital at that point. So
and distributed. It's like,
exactly.
Like leaving the password, the little Post-it notes all over the place on the subway platform.
Right.
Yeah, and what we do is we provide one central place for you to secure all those. Now there's many DevOps tools that have some of these capabilities built in, but these tools are not built for that purpose. We've dealt with some of these vendors. Puppet, Chef, and some of them come back to us and say, hey, look, security's not our thing. We have this one little feature here. If we get a customer, we'll refer them back to you, right? Because they know that's not really their cup of tea. And then you have to do that for several different tools. So like those different secrets providers don't talk to each other. And then you don't gain a full access to full visibility into your access picture as well.
Yeah, because there's so many different use cases. Like Doug was talking about, my application has to authenticate to the database. My biggest use case in the software that we're maintaining and writing is I've got to authenticate to multiple external APIs. And how do I store and manage those keys, right? You talked about SSH keys, right? And this is just for my application. When we talk about DevOps, now we've got CI tools and integration tools and development tools that also need to authenticate. Like, oh, by the way, I need to go push an entirely new environment up to the cloud. Well, how does your Jenkins tool or whatever automate that process without having the credentials? Well, it can't. I have to either put those in the clear text config file, right? Or I have to use some kind of secrets manager.
And there's credentials being put into almost everything now just to authenticate anything you pull. If you pull it down an API from the cloud, you want to access it, you may actually have credentials between there. So again, there's another set of password logins in there that are embedded in that source code. And boom, there it is. And then all it takes is somebody to distribute that code, and then if you just stupidly use that password all over the place, you've got to release an update. And
I mean, it used to be you had your different machines. They sit there, they're physical, but now you have infrastructure as code. So now, like, those secrets, they do sit into code. Like, you know, how do I get access to this, get access to that? So, like, actually, the problem's gotten worse.
Way worse.
And then one thing I saw a lot of was as people started building these like multi-piece systems. So they got a server here and they got a server there because they want to serve something. They want to serve DNS in the US and serve DNS in Asia as an example. They put the same passwords on both those systems because that way the person who manages them can easily log into all the all the different servers that are doing the same task. And all of a sudden, boom, there's the password, and now you just distributed the whole thing.
And so that's something we do manage, and then we can do that from like the DevOps space, but even from the on-prem space as well, like where CyberArk basically got its start, working with like large enterprise companies, you know, who are still using these servers today. I mean, they didn't throw all of that stuff out because it would have cost them a lot of money, and it still works. So you have to bridge the gap from that world to the world of DevOps. In a lot of cases, what happens is that they're grabbing these individual tools from different DevOps tools, or they're using something else. And so you have you know, one system for this, one system for that. And so with our enterprise password vault integration, we can now synchronize those two worlds together from the DevOps to the on-prem world. Right, so you don't have to worry about like having the password here, having it there, and then like having to manage all that. You can have that taken care of centrally from one place.
And it's even the management piece that we haven't even talked about yet, is that if there's a password that's hard-coded in my code, while I may do everything I can to minimize that risk, it might only be internally, I may not be putting in any public GitHub repos. Now what happens when I have to change or rotate that password, right? How do I do that if, like Doug said, it was in my code, but I checked in my code and Doug used my code, and then that code was replicated to another development group, and now it's in 25 different projects. When we change that password, now you just broke
everything.
Potentially 25 different projects times 3 because they got a dev, a QA, and a production. And by the way, the password's the same in all of them, and all of a sudden everything. I mean, that's an extreme example, of course, right? But it underscores the point.
Not too much, you know.
It's
not that extreme.
How you rotate and manage those passwords. What happens when someone leaves? Doug leaves and goes to another organization. He still probably has a copy of that code, and we all know that that happens. Now he also has my password. I always take code.
But that problem was, I mean, even a long time ago, that problem was there with your main databases because if you change one password, everything stopped working, and you might have hundreds.
Your manager comes to. You know, you change that password. Don't ever do that again.
No, I mean, they literally they had a note at a place I worked that said, "Do not change this password on the database," because all this different code in the company that was scattered across all over the place, all used that database, and they used that same password everywhere. And you were going to have to start making phone calls if you needed to change the password, because I was looking at it going, "We really ought to change this."
Yeah, but now someone has to change code if it's in the code, right? And then if they fat finger it, recompile it, push it out, what other changes did I make it in a branch that I hadn't fully? I mean, there's a million.
It's an 18-month process.
You know, what we're describing is not. I mean, it is reality for many organizations.
In a lot of cases, in larger organizations, say like banks, people might not want to change that because if that system goes down, they lose their jobs. I mean, I know people. You know, because I worked in the space for a while where that's happened to people they know. They did something and everything breaks. So if you just leave it the way it's been for like a long time, what's the punishment there for them? You know, for the person doing it.
Right. Things still work.
Right. Yeah.
Everything's good.
So that's why you should automate it, and then just having something that's like hard coded, like that. A secret is just bad coding in general. I mean, you learn that in I think high school or college when you're coding. You know, you don't put like a constant right there in your code. You know.
Yeah, they tried to teach me that.
It didn't sink in.
I guess that's why I'm not a software developer today.
I'm not either, so.
Right? It's just you write code for your own benefit, and you can break a lot of those rules. But you know, putting credit. So when how much do I have to change my code, John, when I want to use a secrets or a vault, right?
Right.
How do I have to change my code?
Well, if you're using nothing or something else.
If I'm using nothing.
If you're using nothing, you'll have to change that to like an environment variable. where we can populate that with the proper secret at runtime and inject
I mean, it may not be in my code, but it's in a clear text config file that I'm reading and including an environment variable. Oh, wait, that's kind of like the same thing, right?
Yeah, right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, multiple ways to skin the cat there.
Yeah.
So then in that case, I think it'd be easier to introduce a secrets management.
I'm just populating that environment variable with a different process through just pretty much a pretty simple function call inclusion of a library?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's that easy.
That's awesome. Joff, Carlos, Jeff, questions on this topic?
You got me.
You're just hard coding stuff right in your code or in the configuration file.
Actually, it's like the heck with John. I'm doing it anyways.
I was doing stuff. I have to admit, I was coding. Oh.
You were just curious. Actively coding a password right into your code, John.
That's right. I was actively coding, had credentials in my code. No, I was just kidding. I wasn't doing that.
I was curious because John mentioned something about before DevOps existed. When did DevOps start?
That's a good question, and I think that that depends on who you ask. And then
I'm asking you.
Yeah. Well, if you ask me, I would say probably like around 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, it's if you read the Phoenix Project and listen to Beyond the Phoenix Project, Gene Kim, John Willis, and others, started bringing it into IT and security at some point. Was it 10 years ago maybe when they started? I'm not sure when exactly they started. They talk about it, Jeff, in Beyond the Phoenix Project, which is kind of like almost like a podcast, but they put it together as a book. Listen to it in an audio format. They talk about the first time that I think it was John Willis that presented at a developer conference and brought basically what they did, Jeff, was bring concepts from manufacturing, auto manufacturing in particular, into software and IT. And in the Beyond the Phoenix Project, they talk about how basically they just mirrored exactly what, I can't remember his first name, Goldrat, was the one that wrote The Goal and wrote Beyond the Goal, or there was an audiobook Beyond the Goal, and how Gene and others just basically mirrored that process. And the concepts in manufacturing that were in The Goal were started in when? The 70s? I want to say 70s.
Yeah, you could
is when
say
that started.
Right.
Or like, in the 70s.
Say like agile process, like Toyota.
Yes,
when they started doing that.
Yeah. That was like 70s, right?
It could have been, right? But when I worked at IBM as a developer, we probably started like picking up like around 10 years ago. So like maybe Toyota started doing it in the 70s, but then like when did other people actually start doing it? If like one guy that does DevOps, when does it actually become DevOps, or when does it take off? And I don't think it's until you have like a decent number of people actually doing it.
Yeah. No, I forgot what I was going to say because Jeff asked a very fascinating question. Oh, I'm sorry. Carlos was talking before. I wanted to make sure Carlos asked his question. Sorry, Carlos.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I've been there in situations where we've had a developer all of a sudden for one of the external test systems push out a key in an SDK in a code commit, and then having to figure how to remove that commit from the history in GitHub to try to get it fixed. I've seen that happen, been involved in that stuff. And yeah, credentials are hard. Keeping a credential vault is also hard. I remember I've been in situations where I had multiple credential vaults to play in my lab to work on. And I remember there are some that by default are HTTP and not HTTPS. Others by default are not in the domain. Others send credentials to the loopback in clear text.
Exactly.
On the host. So yeah, it's a very difficult problem to solve.
And that's a really couple good points there. You just basically mentioned what my point was about having like multiple providers or multiple different tools to do the same thing. So it makes it difficult because one tool does it this way, another tool does it that way, and that really increases the chance that you'll make a mistake. And if you're a developer, most likely you're not a security expert. You're just trying to figure this stuff out, get that done, and move on to the next thing. So that's why it's better to have one tool to do that and really have it managed by someone who that's kind of their domain, security.
Absolutely. is that also a good segue into was it Summon? Is your other kind of almost? I want to say it's like an add-on to this process.
Mm-hmm. Well, what does Summon do? It's just like a component that we use where you can replace those secrets with an environment variable for Conjure, and it works with open source Conjure or Conjure Enterprise, and then you can inject those secrets in real time.
It's actually pronounced Simone.
I know, right?
That's if you're using the fancy.
The fancy French pronunciation.
The French version of Conjure.
Yeah.
Oh, and you mentioned, John, that when you register or download the open source, that there's a tutorial that you take people through. So there's an educational piece, and what's in that educational piece?
Yeah. I mean, because you were talking about how security maybe is like somewhat unaware, or like trying to figure out how to approach developers with this.
Even developers could be unaware as well. Sure.
Yeah, developers or security. On our website, conjure.org.
/Security Weekly.
You can go to the tutorial where it says try Conjure, and it takes you through step by step. And even if you don't know what you're doing, it's simple enough and educational as you go. So it takes you through the process of creating a secret, very simple, and then creating what we call machine identity, which verifies that container or that machine or application is what it says it is and not someone else. And that's how you authenticate that. And then you can set up a security policy where you can authorize it to certain resources. And this way you can both control authentication and authorization. And then we show you the difference in the tutorial. So you find out this particular machine is authenticated, but it's not authorized to this resource, while it's authorized to a different resource. And that's all controlled through your security policy.
Is that like a descendant of Kerberos kind of stuff? Because we used to use Kerberos to do something. It didn't have all those other pieces to it, but it was just so that we could authenticate that machine was who it said it was. It had a Kerberos ticket on it.
Right.
And then that ticket was validated when it tried to write a request to the database. That was one of the earliest things I did in DevOps, trying to get around this very problem, because it was just, how do I, even though I couldn't keep the credentials out, they're out there. I don't know what I'm going to do about it. But when somebody did a request, if they didn't have a Kerberos ticket on the machine and it couldn't be authenticated locally, the machine would refuse the request. So it wasn't as sophisticated as what you're doing, but that's kind of an old-fashioned.
There are some parallels to Kerberos. And I don't pretend to be a Kerberos expert, but there are some interesting parallels between them.
At a high level, at my previous company, we've talked to customers who've tried to get rid of secrets that way, and it doesn't really work.
Well, at the time, it was the only option I had.
So you use Kerberos to get rid of the secrets?
Replace everything with Kerberos,
I mean, I tried all kinds of things where it was restricting access, but it was all dial-in serial stuff, so it was really hard to restrict access, and people could dial in, and I was trying to get them to restrict blacklist phone numbers and all this, and that was hard to do too. And it just got weirder and weirder. But then we found this Kerberos thing that MIT developed, and it was like, oh, well, this thing could actually limit, because it has to validate this ticket. It wasn't sophisticated like that, but it was the same kind of concept at a very basic level. It didn't get rid of the secrets. The secret was still out there, but it prevented someone who had the secret from being able to actually come in. So not only do you know the password at the door, but the person looks at you and goes, "Yeah, I don't know you," and they close the window in your face.
Well, we have the security policy that you can set up with a YAML file, so it's a lot easier to understand that access picture and authorization picture. And then that reminds me of, we talked earlier about you said you had kind of like an incident or a breach.
I was just going to talk about that. So, and actually that stemmed from when we were deploying locally and internally, we are just learning Docker, we're just learning containers, we're just learning the tool set that represents DevOps. And no one's like born knowing this stuff, right? Like there's a learning curve for everyone. Like at some point, someone's got to learn the new technology and test it. And when we were doing that, we had like a catastrophic failure of internal hardware. And so, and this is a business critical software there. And I'm like, so we're pushing to the cloud now, right? And so we all raced to go up into the cloud. And over the weekend, we realized pretty quickly that we had forgotten to close down the Docker API. So it turns out that Jenkins was talking to the Docker API without any authentication. And when we push up to the cloud, we didn't apply policies to restrict that API. So our Docker API is hanging out there free and loose to the internet. And like within 48 hours, man, it was like almost instant that attacker finds that and goes, oh, sweet, I can upload my container through the API, and then I can use your AWS instance to DDoS, this other target. Now, fortunately, they were very noisy. In Amazon's, we had CloudWatch configured, and so like alerts were going up all over the place. Shut it down, do the cleanup, snapshots of containers, do forensics. It was like the lamest. I think I went through it on the show. Lamest, or in my presentation, or both, lamest malware ever. Like, it was just ridiculous. Like, I could do the forensics without doing even too much research, and I'm not by no means a forensics expert, and hadn't done that in a while on actual malware. So it was ridiculous. And so that's what happened. But when John, you and I were talking about that, I was like, had we thought about implementing, something like Conjure and having it provide that authentication, I think it kind of spoke to an underlying issue that when developers are forced to push code out and rush out the environment, that they'll just leave the authentication out completely and go, I'll deal with that later.
Right.
And then you start thinking about those points in your DevOps process where you've got a Docker registry and you've got a Docker API and tools need to tie those together. All of those things, you can configure authentication, but it's an extra step to do in your process. And if it's all local, you may go, that's fine. If it's all up in the cloud and it's not exposed and controlling, that's fine, but it's not. I think you really need that vault to control all of and help control all of that access. Right?
Yeah, and authentication.
And that has to be part of your DevOps.
Yes.
Because the problem is that so all too often it's not a part of the DevOps.
Right.
That's just a problem to solve.
Oh, like, that's security's problem.
And then they're like, our deadline is tomorrow, fix it. And you're going, everything works except I can't connect to the database or whatever. And it's just like, use anonymous. Or you just like turn it wide open and we'll fix it. Yeah, we'll fix it later.
Yeah.
And it's not a part of the audit in the prod dev process for DevOps, and then it just slides on through, and the next thing you know, 8,000 people have it on their systems running, and it's you just hope nobody notices. It's compiled code, nobody will ever figure it out.
Yeah, and we address that through like what I mentioned before, machine identity, and what we do is we install a certificate using the very APIs that are built into that container orchestration platform, and then we use multiple factors that only the container that's legitimate would actually have, not just one factor, which could be the secret. It's multiple factors, and it's using just what's already built into that container orchestration platform. Nothing extra is needed, and it varies from platform to platform. But we built out those Kubernetes. I think one of the latest is the one for Kubernetes, and you can see that on our conjure.org blog, where we just explain it in detail. It's pretty interesting.
That's awesome.
I remember you were pretty excited when it happened, so it was a good learning experience.
Yeah, when we have a security incident, barring any catastrophic repercussions, if it's basically of low impact and easy to clean up, as this one was, and easily detectable, I'm like, you know what? This is awesome. This is great. Like, it's a good learning. I mean, you learn more from your failures, right?
Exactly.
Your successes, and it gives us. I'm like, because the developers are like, oh my god, like, there's a security. I'm like, this is awesome, and they're just looking like, what? What do you mean this is awesome? Like, this is going to be great. We get to do forensics. We get to do incident response. We get to talk about it on the show because we have to disclose these things on the show when they happen. So it's a good lesson learned. Learn from our mistakes in doing that too. But I think it also underscores one of the other points that we made at the top of the interview, John, in that you may not know what your developers are doing to address this problem. How, like, if you're sitting there listening to this interview going, like, I wonder how my developers are solving this problem in the 25 different projects or more that we have in our organization. Like, I wonder how they're doing it, right? Which is why I wanted to encourage, if you're a security professional and you have some software that can make use of this, to go test it out and then go have the conversation with your developers and say, okay, what are you using? Maybe they're using something different. Maybe they're using Conjure. Worst case, they're like, what are you talking about, Paul? I don't I don't know. We just leave our APIs open and hard code passwords in our code. Like, what's the problem, right? Everything works. To Doug's point, everything works. And the danger of that is once you set it up, especially in like a continuous integration, like, hey, Jenkins is working. Like that's awesome. You forget that you're like, oh yeah, there was that one
happy.
point. Yeah, you're so happy it works, right? Because your tool chain is like massive.
Willie said it's ready to go.
And you're like, well,
call marketing.
I'll make a mental note and I'll go back and I'll add that certificate or add that authentication later. And you're just adding features and pushing that stuff out, and you forget until a security person, who hopefully is listening to this interview, comes to you and says, oh, by the way, Doug, like, what did you consider authentication when you set up those systems? You're like, oh yeah, when I was installing it, yeah, there's nothing there right now. That's okay, right? And you're like, no. You need something like a Conjure to help manage those secrets.
And later is tough, because then you're going back and you're saying, we're going to have to do a version update, to fix this across all the people that installed it.
Like Carlos was saying, it's hard to go figure out where those are.
You've gone beyond the edge, and you're not coming back.
Yeah.
That's true. That's it.
I'll start using buzzwords where you'll shift security left. That's what you should do in the process. But I think it makes a lot of sense here. And that's where security needs to get involved, where they do need to talk to the developers, see what they're doing. Because if you ask what the developers are doing about this, being an ex-developer, they're doing the easiest thing possible, because this is not what they get paid to do.
And a lot of security people were not trained in app development either, and they're not very strong coders. And they go down there to the coding shop, and they come in, because I was acting as an auditor, and they didn't know what my background was. And literally, you'd listen to the programmers go, I know you can't understand things like programming. I'm going, Well,
and this is an interesting case where you can be a pretty good programmer, maybe even expert programmer in a security context. Like, I think of the way that I, write software and scripts, like it's really like just for me, right? And I think a lot of us security professionals are in that same boat. Like when I write something, it's really just for me. And if I release it open source, it's because it helps other security professionals, accomplish that one quick task. But when you look at how you're developing commercial software or large open source projects, that process is very different. And that's where I think the knowledge gap is. It's not so much that we don't understand programming as security professionals. I think a lot of us do. I think it's a pretty common skill among us. We certainly encourage that new people coming into the field have that skill. Different skill being able to write code versus be an actual software engineer that's participating in writing code that's being rolled up into a release and rolled out to customers.
And a Python script's not the same thing as a gigantic application that supports manufacturing at Ford Motor Company that's got 8,000 subparts and was written by 100 different people over 42 years.
Different ballgame entirely.
And so that it's very difficult for security auditors, security professionals to look at that code. And guess what? When you go to the programming shop and you tell them we need to look at this, they're going to go, it's all fine and everything's working. We're on version 15.2 sub 5. Everything is cool. Don't put a red dot on our board. Because they don't. I mean, I ran the programming shop, and I know what happened when somebody came in there and was put red dots on my board, going, that screen that's like purple? It could be kind of a more greenish color. Going, I will kill you where you stand.
You've talked a lot, I think, on your previous shows about DevSecOps, and a lot of people view DevOps as already including security, and that's where I disagree. I think, especially in this regard. Because most people I've talked to have been to a lot of trade shows. And when they talk about security, and I say, "Hey, DevOps security," like, "Oh yeah, you're scanning registries, and you're making sure that there's nothing like vulnerable, no vulnerabilities, and everything's up to date." Like, well, that's just one component of security. What are you doing about access? And so, like, that's why it's not already included in DevOps.
No,
and my point earlier wasn't that developers don't know anything about security. They might, but there's no way they have like the 10, 15 years of experience that a professional security person would have.
And don't forget, an awful lot of us programmers grew up in an era when security was, considered unnecessary, because only weird Spock types could even understand what you're doing. So why would we need to worry about it? I mean, I've been told that before.
A denial of service attack was knocking all your punch cards down on the floor?
Yeah, something like that. That's exactly what it was, yeah. That's what you should describe it as, the denial of service attack. We called that a de-shuffling attack.
De-shuffling, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Hey, nerd!
Oh, boy. Okay, I think we covered it really well. I was glad we had that conversation.
Yeah, that's a very nice thing to know about.
It is. It really is.
You should look into
useful.
this if you haven't looked into it already, because I'm really a fan.
John, thank you so much for appearing on Pulse Security Weekly. You're going to stick around for the next segment?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, awesome. I encourage all of our listeners to go to conjure.org/Security Weekly. Check it out. It's open source. You can download it, mess around with it, integrate it into your projects, test it out, and have better conversations with your developers, more productive conversations with your developers.
Bend them to your will.
Yep. That's right. With that, we're going to take...
I'm on Slack, so you can reach out to me.
Awesome. Slack. Is there a Slack channel for Conjure?
Yep, it's on conjure.org.
Awesome. We'll be right back.